All right, we're going to review the basic tools that we work with each Sunday on the GH4, the Panasonic GH4, and this will also apply to the G7, I believe it is, that we have in the chapel currently. So as we have it right now, I have on display a bag of coffee, a candle, and then a little plant back there. So I want to show the relation between our various tools and how we use them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at white balance. So we have very specific settings that we use for white balance, and I want to show you how to check those. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to tip you're going to look at the top of your camera. You're going to see a WB here, right next to your ISO button. Click the WB. So I'm going to click it. It's going to bring up your white balance settings. So right now, the settings that it's on are not the settings that we use on Sundays. So I'm going to hit WBK set and make sure you're on this little wrench icon. So you want to be, you want to be on the wrench icon next to the K. Okay, so once you're there, you hit you hit WBK set, and now you can set your white balance. Now look what happens to the color. As I go down, things become much more blue. As I go up, things become much more warm. Now this is because in my house right now, I have natural sunlight coming in. But in our auditorium, we are shooting, we're shooting amber lighting onto the stage via our stage lights. So we like to cool things down a bit. So we go all the way down to, I believe it is, you'll have to check whatever the current settings are on the checklist, but I believe we go down to 2800 to give us a more cool look, since our lights are so warm on people. It could be 2600, but I believe it's 2800. So once we do that, we hit the set button, all right, and then we're gonna hit the adjust button. Now the adjust button allows you to tweak ever so slightly the color spectrum that we had there. So if I go all the way down to the side, you can kind of see that the colors are changing just slightly, specifically in the background. So this allows you to tweak even more what you've chosen. So we always go down to B1. So if I go over, this is the middle. If I go over 1, you see it says B1. If I go all the way down, says M9, and I believe that is our current adjustment we add. So I hit set, and now you can see I have adjustment of B1 M9 on 2800 Kelvin, or K. That's our white balance, okay? Once you're done with that, you can just simply hit the menu button to return. So now keep in mind that you also have this display button. So that is, the white balance will be our first tool we're going to talk about. The second tool we're going to talk about is the display button, because it allows you to cycle through a lot of different versions of your screen. One in particular being helpful is this version, which allows you to see all your settings on one page. The next version that is particularly helpful is the clean screen, which basically takes away all information. The screen that I personally like to be on is this one, because I want to see everything, and I also want to see my leveling line. You see that line, that's yellow line that's going across the screen? For our purposes, we want that to be green at all times. We don't want to be shooting something sideways or just off axis. Okay, so we've gone over the display button, we've gone over our white balance. Let's discuss aperture, shutter, and ISO. Now, always on our GH4s, this front knob, if you just start adjusting it without adjusting anything else, it's always going to, and actually let me make sure I'm not in the right mode here. So this is good to know. We always want to be in camera manual mode. So you press this button right here. If it's popped out, that means it's not locked. If it's popped in and that silver part isn't showing, that means it's locked. So here we go. Got us back into the right mode on the camera. So now that looks more like it. So you can see this number right here adjusting. We always leave it at 60, no matter what. Now, you may hear my dog in the background. I apologize. She's crying. If we go up, you can see things get darker. and that flame, boy, it becomes a lot more smooth. But if we go down and just it gets a lot brighter, obviously, and we would never do this, but I'm going to adjust my aperture so you can see that flame and how it's become a lot more jittery. See, notice how jittery it is now? That's the trouble with the shutter. A faster shutter gives you a smoother flame. Look at that flame. It's just so smooth. We're at 500 shutter. It also darkens your image. But if we all are using different shutter speeds, then we're not going to have a consistent look between cameras. So we just leave it at 60, and that's where we live. Currently, that's our setting. Now, in the future, if your checklist says something different, then that's a different story. Now, let's look at Aperture. Aperture is really fun. So Aperture, as you can see, this particular lens, which is a 25 millimeter little prime lens, it allows you to go down to 1.7 aperture, which is insane. You can see that we are allowing in a lot of light. You can see the extremely blurry background, which is what we love. We love having really blurry backgrounds. Whoops, I just messed that up. Come on, little guy. There it goes. And that's what having a super low aperture lets you do. Now I'm gonna show you. If I raise this up, whoops, wrong one, Joey. If I raise my aperture up, and I'm gonna use this wheel to do so. If I raise my aperture up, you can notice obviously it's gonna get darker, but you can also see that all of a sudden the backgrounds become a lot more crisp and not blurry. Let me adjust it back down. Okay, 1.7, the only thing that's in focus is our coffee bag. But if I start adjusting my aperture up, you notice that background starts to become more in focus. So that's called depth of field. And the way we shoot our Sunday services is we love as much depth of field as possible. Now, we're never going to be able to achieve this much of a depth of field, this blurry of a background, because most of our lenses are not going to go down to 1.7 because we're using zoom lenses and kit lenses at that. So we're never going to accomplish that. We're usually going to be sitting probably with our big boy lens that sits on camera 1, maybe 3.2, which still gives you a nice blurry background, but typically we're going to be shooting anywhere from 4.5 all the way up to 5.6. And as you can see, you still get a slightly blurry background, and I'll compensate real quick with my ISO. So you can still see the black background is definitely still blurry, but we've adjusted ISO. Now, I don't know if you noticed that, but when I adjusted the ISO up to change my lighting, everything got a little bit more grainier, a little bit more grainy. And I'll show you again. I'll take my ISO down to 200, and I'll bring my aperture down to brighten the image back up. To me, that looks a lot more crisp, a lot more clean. But when I start adding in that ISO, and I'll bump my aperture down to darken the image here, we really don't want to go above 800, 1000 is maximum. But the problem is we start adding in a little bit of noise. Now for our church, for our current cameras and our current lenses, what we're willing to do is we're willing to go at least to 1000. We don't go beyond 1000. I prefer no more than 800, to be honest. That is if lighting conditions are low. Now, since you'll normally be at a 4.5, you're going to have to, and I'll show you, 4.5 is obviously pretty dark. If this was the face of a vocalist on stage, they would be in the dark, right? So you have to add, depending on wherever your aperture is, you have to add in ISO to brighten up your subject. Because on most of our lenses, am not going to be able to go below 4 point whatever to like a 1.7 to brighten up the image. It's just not, we don't have the lenses that are able to do that outside of this prime lens, which is a non-zoom lens. So to keep this illustration current with the equipment we currently have, we'll stick at 4.5. Now, ISO, as you know, is this button located right here in the middle. If I click that button, it brings up my ISO window. Then I can use this wheel right here to adjust my ISO settings. Now, I can go as high as 6400, but you can really see the grain in that image. Now, definitely brighten up the image, but that is not what we want to do. So, no more than 1000, prefer no more than 800. Typically, you can live anywhere, depending on the lens, between 200 and 400. There is nothing lower than 200. The camera always stays at 200. Now, that is our settings. The last thing I will show you, and I will bring, whoops, that's my shutter. I'm going to keep that at 60. I will bring my aperture down so I can get some lighting to show you with. I want to remind you about our peaking settings. Now, we have peaking settings that you see this green, it's kind of like an aqua light that's starting to shine on the edge of this object. We use peaking to show us when an object is in focus. But the problem is you want to make sure that it doesn't just have a little bit of peaking on it like this. You can see a little bit of peaking right there. You want to make sure it has as much peaking on it that you can dial in. That will show you that it's the most in focus. So just because you see an object that's starting to peak or have those brightly colored lines around the edges does not mean it's actually in focus. So I'm going to go and I'm going to grab this candle back here and I'm going to make it peak, and I just passed it. So sometimes it's more apparent than others. That one's very slight. You see a little bit of peaking on it. You see that? And then I can grab the plant, and I'm getting a little bit of peaking on the little root that's coming off the plant and on the cup that it's in. So those are our basic settings, and I wanted to show you that because I believe it's important to do a little refresher. So count this as your camera 101 training refresher for those of you who have already gone through this training, and those of you who this is new to, this is your Camera Basics 101 as far as the tools of the camera are concerned, not talking about the lens or techniques for using the lens.